Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual TrekCon 5 with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
And, of course, Melissa Longo.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Huskin. Today, we've got an amazing guest, Star Trek novelist and publishing consultant, Mr. Dayton Ward. What's up, Dayton? How are you?
Going, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
So great having you. We've seen so many of your books on so many shelves, and you are like you're like everywhere in Star Trek. The more you dig, the more you find.
Yes.
Dayton Ward has got like fingers and feet and toes in every single aspect of Star Trek. I'd just like to start off very quickly with something that I know well. And it is the A Time to book series. You wrote two of those, if I remember. Well, those were the ones, this was right after Star Trek The Next Generation was done and all their movies were over. This was maybe 2003, 4, 5, right around there. And they kind of came at a good time in my life where I was missing Star Trek and I wanted more Star Trek. And it felt like there was a series of more Next Generation episodes and movies. Can you tell us a bit about how those came to be? Like, were there multiple meetings beforehand? Whose idea was it? Where did it all come from? Because I believe it was a series of like 7 books, 6 or 7.
It was originally envisioned as 12 books.
Wow.
6 different authors were going to write 2 books each. And then they pared it down to 9 books. And this was at a point where I was still early in my writing career, and definitely as far as Star Trek was concerned. I'd written a novel and a couple of short stories at that point. And my writing partner and I, Kevin Dillmore, he and I had written a couple of novellas for Star Trek for an ebook only kind of thing that was going on at the time. So we weren't what I call the starting lineup of the novelists at that point. One of the authors that they had pegged for 2 of the books had to back out really late into the game, like as the planning was underway and the publication dates had been set and everything. So Kevin and I got basically called up from the minors at that point to pitch an idea to fill these 2 books into this 9-book series. So that was our call up. And at that point, 7 of the 9 books had already been parsed out. The other novelists had already figured out who they were going to work with, which character arcs, which plot arcs were going to go on, and we were left with kind of the dregs, for lack of a better term. So our editor, who conceived this product or this process, because the whole 9 books are set between the last 2 Next Gen movies, kind of bridge the gap to explain some questions that were left. And so he goes, the first 2 books are set on a planet, or I'm sorry, the first 2 books are set in space. Books 4 or 5 and 6 are set on a planet. So don't set your stories in either of those locations. Go. So
that's it.
So over Christmas 2002, Kevin and I figured out an outline and ended up slotting in very nicely. After we had a chance to read what everybody else was doing and staked our claim. And basically, that was the point where I started getting a regular call from the publisher to write Star Trek novels. I've been doing them pretty much once a year or even twice a year since then. So
just to follow up on that a lot, because I've been waiting 20 years to ask these questions. You obviously knew Next Generation very well. Was there, you said they just kind of gave you 2 little hints and said go, but as the process was going, was there somebody looking over your shoulder saying, oh, can you do it more like this, or we can't do that? Was there an outline they gave you? Was there any other kind of guidance they gave?
We had the basic overall arc of the whole miniseries. Like, we wanted to get the characters from Insurrection to Nemesis and bridge the gap as far as where the characters were in those points in time. So we got to play with Data and the emotion chip a little bit. We got to play with Beverly Crusher going back and forth to Starfleet Medical and then back to the ship again. Worf was after DS9, so was he going to be an ambassador? Was he going to be a Starfleet officer? What's going on with all? So basically that was all the direction we had. That and what everybody else had already staked out as far as what they wanted to do with the different characters and the overarching plot lines for the entire series. After that, they left us alone. We wrote the outline. We had it approved by what was then called CBS licensing. Now it's Paramount licensing. But they let us go. And then the editor, of course, he's kind of like the showrunner on a TV show at this point. I mean, he's managing the other writers and making sure everything gels and everybody's in their right lane and not crossing over each other or whatever, doing something weird with one character that might conflict with the next book, that kind of thing. So it's really very much like a TV show writer's room at this point. That's the way the novels had been done for pretty much 20 years before all the new batch of Star Trek shows came along and just sort of torpedoed everything we were doing. You know, as it happens when you write tie-ins. You're kind of at the mercy of the parent property, and that's just the way it goes. We all knew the job was rough when we took it, so it's no big deal.
Wow.
Yeah, Dayton, I had a question that kind of goes a little bit farther back. It says that you retired with honorable discharge from the Marine Corps after 11 years of service. And my question is, one, it said you did info systems. I don't know what is info systems. That's my first question.
It's information systems. It's a fancy way of saying I was a software developer. So
Okay.
I did software for supply logistics, financial, even embedded systems for like targeting computers on weapon systems. I wrote, I probably wrote in half a dozen, 8 or 9 different languages over the course of 11 years. So I did that, and then I was kind of at a pivot point. If I re-enlist one more time, then I'll be at 15 at that point. I should probably stay for the full 20 if I do that far, right? My wife was kind of tired of moving around every couple of years. We'd moved like 3 times in 4 years after we got married, so she was kind of done, and I can't blame her. And I was here in Kansas City, and the job market for IT people was really good, so I just decided to get out, and we've lived here ever since. That was 30 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah,
I worked in corporate software for another 20 years, and then finally, at that point, I was writing, and I decided to become a full-time writer.
Yeah, that's where I want to know right there. That point you said at that point I started writing. So you're doing all this other stuff. What is that point? What do you mean that point you started writing?
So I got out of the service and I started working in the private sector, and then by then I started writing as kind of a hobby, just sort of a creative outlet for my day job, because I was I was a guy in a cubicle all the time. So I started writing as a creative outlet. I was a big Star Trek fan, so I wrote some Star Trek stories. And then the company who publishes all the Star Trek novels, they launched a short story contest for unpublished writers. And it was a Star Trek contest. So they gave out a set of rules and guidelines, and we submitted our short stories, and they got reviewed. And the winners, they all went into a collection of short stories. We all got paid like professional writers. So I did that a couple of years in a row, actually. I sold a story to the first 3 of those anthologies, those annual contests. And that's when Pocket came and said, okay, you can't write for this contest anymore because now you're a, quote, professional writer, unquote. So how would you like to write a Star Trek novel? That was back in 2000.
Even better.
So fun.
Yeah, so basically, I've been writing Star Trek novels for about 24 years now.
Can you tell us the premise of those short stories that raised their eyebrows?
The first one I wrote was, if you've seen Generations, which I'm assuming we've all seen everything, right? Spoilers are for those of you who are listening. So the part where Kirk dies at the end, there's like a bubble of time moment that I introduced into the story where Kirk basically has a life flash before his eyes kind of thing, but he gets to see how life would have gone had he not participated in certain key events. So basically he gets visited by an omnipotent being who helps him relive these events, but without his participation. So he realizes he really did make a difference like he always wanted to, and then he passes on, like the movie. The second one I did was a time travel deal. Remember the 2 time travel cops from DS9?
Oh, yeah.
The 2 guys who come to investigate after the Tribbles episode. So they're basically the Dragnet team, and I send them back to the 90s to mess around with the time travel storyline. And then the last one was, if you're familiar with Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln from the original show, the agents on Earth, I introduce basically a character from the DS9 episode with the Ferengi at Roswell.
Little green men.
There's an army captain. There's an army captain who basically becomes part of Project Blue Book, which is a real thing that actually happened. Project Blue Book is a real thing. And in Star Trek lore, he investigated the aliens for years after the Ferengi left, and he finds his way to the Air Force pilot who sees the Enterprise in the original show.
Oh my gosh.
Captain Christopher, and so he's all wrapped up in all this. So it's, I don't know, I just find plot threads and like to pull on them in time in different knots and see what happens.
Yeah, that's really
So-
cool.
So how did this writing for the Star Trek novels lead to being a publishing consultant for Paramount Global?
That's a long journey. So I've been doing the novels for, like I said, going back to 2000, 2001. And over the course of that period, I've written other Star Trek stuff. I've written in other realms. I've done original science fiction. I've written for other properties, and gotten to know the people who work at licensing for Paramount very well. The advent of the internet really kind of made everybody closer. It used to be you handed all your stuff into your editor at your publishing house.
Mhm.
They dealt with licensing. There was never any interaction directly with those individuals, but with Twitter and Facebook and everything else, it's easy to follow each other and give each other crap on Twitter, and or mess with each other and become friends on Twitter. And you meet at conventions and you do all this other stuff. And so over a period of many years, I built a rapport up with the licensing folks. And then about 5 years ago, they decided they wanted to have somebody. It's farther back than that, because it's back before Discovery was still in production. So they wanted somebody who could be a continuity cop and a publishing consultant who could ride herd or help them ride herd on all the different publishing initiatives. So books, comics, role-playing games, video games, even stuff that's like the escape room they have in Vegas. If it has a narrative or a script, they kind of give it to me and let me give it the once over. So I started working for them back in 2019 formally. And then the other thing I do is I read the scripts from all the current shows, and I mark them up for lore and continuity and trivia and whatever other things that they wanted to have me to point out. And then I either give those back to the writers' rooms for review, but I also use what I've learned about the scripts to go, there's a great plot thread that they left hanging. That would be a great comic follow-up or a great way for a book series. So I'm making all these notes all the time about the different things that are going on in the different writers' rooms.
That's really cool. When you earmark something like, oh, that could be a good short story or a good novel or a good something or other, when you put it away, do you then come back and pitch it to somebody? And if so, who are you pitching that to? When you get that idea, where does that go, to go into publishing?
What ends up happening more often than not is, because I interact directly with representatives from like IDW, the comics publisher, or Simon & Schuster, the novels publisher. We have, I have regular meetings along with other representatives from licensing with IDW, like on every Monday. We meet with them to see where they are with their different projects. But we get to read the pitches and we get to read the concept proposal that some of these guys or some of these folks will submit. And then I'll remember something that I made a note of, last year in a script. We like to do something that dovetails between the two seasons of Discovery. And I'll remember something from my notes. You might be able to incorporate this.
Got it.
You might be able to pull on this thread. Or, hey, here's a story that they never even got around to doing. When Picard was still in its development process, they commissioned a novel to kind of be the prequel to that series that showed what Picard was doing and how he retired and all this other stuff. And it covers the Mars attack that becomes prevalent throughout the show.
Wow.
And one of the things that I tried to sell them on, and I'm only saying this because he's on the call with us right now, is like, I wanted Jake Sisko to be on the scene when all that happened, and he could be a reporter and talk about this.
We said the same thing.
Yeah, like 50 times.
It was a no-brainer. I'm glad you figured that one out.
I've been trying to do something with Jake Sisko for years, which was great. Another example is more recently, and you probably already talked about it, is they did an autobiography of Ben Sisko.
Yeah.
And it's told as a narrative where Ben is in contact with Jake, and then Jake writes it all up, makes it work. So that was a mechanism where we got to use Jake and pull on threads that we had never pulled on, or I wanted to pull on. So
wow,
it was a lot of fun.
What is this I hear about writers, earning a Wardy and becoming ineligible for stuff? What is that? Where does that stem from? The ineligibility clause.
So that goes back to those Strange New Worlds contests we were talking about earlier. By the rules of the contest, you could only submit up to 3 stories, and that was if you were unpublished anywhere else. So their definition of unpublished writer was fewer than 3 short stories or 1 novel in a paid professional market, meaning you were getting paid pro rates, which at the time was 5 cents a word or more. as it happened, my first 3 professional sales were to the first, second, and third Strange New Worlds anthologies. So I was the first person to basically render myself ineligible by the rules of their contest. I could never submit to that storyline again. So somebody coined the term Wardy as the award you get when you do that. When you do a 3-fer in that contest, you get the award. And so they had a few folks that did that because the contest ran for 10 years. And so there were a few other folks that did that in varying volumes. I just was the first one to do it. So it could have just as easily been a Connor or a Johnson or something, just the way it worked out.
But it's a Wardy. That's pretty. So does that make you? Go ahead. Are you able to write on the television shows as well, or does that disqualify you?
No, I don't. I'm not a member of the guild. I'm not a screenwriter. I don't possess that particular skill set. And as I tell people, I don't think writing novels necessarily translates to being able to write for screen and vice versa. I think there's definitely a learning curve, whichever way you go. I don't.
Is the dialogue the thing that you wouldn't, you don't consider as your wheelhouse or expertise? Is that
I think it's just the format. I mean, I'm not saying I couldn't learn how to do it, but I understand it's a learned skill, and I don't wish to shortchange the people who do that for a living. It is a learned skill, particularly those who do it very well. So I don't wish to stand there and go, "Oh, sure, I wrote a novel. I can absolutely write a teleplay." No, that's too arrogant. I can't do that with a clear conscience. Would I want to do it if the opportunity arose? Possibly, sure, but I feel like nice. Hi, Kat.
Would it
feel like it's something I'd have to earn my way into doing. I don't think that I'm ready to do that just yet.
Is it in the realm of possibility to adapt some of the stuff that you have done already into the actual screen?
I suppose it's possible that someone might take a book or an idea in one of the books and adapt it. There have been talks of, how can we use this material in other mediums, whether it's audio or, something else. I never say never. It's never been done, but that's not saying that it's not possible. It's just a matter of, does someone who's working in one of those rooms want to spend the time doing that, or they want to create their own twist on the concept? They want to do their own thing. I mean, if they called and said, "Hey, we want to adapt these series of novels you wrote," I'd be excited. I wouldn't earn any more money for it, but I'd be excited.
Okay.
Yeah. You recently published a discovery novel. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you hope to see for the 5th and final season of Discovery?
Ooh.
I can't tell you what I hope to see because I know what you're going to see. Remember, I've read all the scripts. I'm spoiled, so I'm spoiled for a year now.
Okay.
So I can't. That would be a loaded question and an unfair answer because I've already gamed the system there a little bit. So the Discovery novel I wrote, it came out last year. It's called Somewhere to Belong, and it's set in the future after Discovery makes the jump to the 32nd century. And it's set between seasons 3 and 4. So if you've watched the show, you know that at the end of season 3, they're still kind of coming to terms with their new reality. They didn't really have a chance to acclimate. They got thrown right into the deep end of the pool for that storyline. And by the time season 4 rolls around, everybody's all hunky-dory and they're all getting along, and all those conflicts and dangling plot threads seem to have been resolved. And so when I was asked to write a Discovery novel, I said, what about all those dangling plot threads that they didn't address? I mean, there's a whole thing that can go on right there. All these character moments that we can mine for fun. And then what I also wanted to do was just do what I call a traditional Star Trek story, where the ship and the crew go somewhere and they find a problem and they try to fix it, which is something Discovery never did. They've always been thrown into one of these galactic emergencies that consumes the whole season.
They got bad luck.
They do. I still feel bad for whoever that captain was on Vulcan that's waiting for the ship to show up. But so I basically pitched it as, I want to do a traditional Star Trek tale, but I want to use Burnham and her crew instead of Kirk and his crew. And I want to do that kind of thing. But I also want to explore all these things you left hanging at the end of season 3. So Paul Stamets is still very irked at Burnham at the end of season 3. And, how are they acclimating to the fact that they can never go home, and all, their family and friends are hundreds of years dead. And I mean, these are real feelings that you get to deal with. So they let me play in that space. The Kirsten Beyer, who works on the shows, and she's also our liaison for publishing, she said, "Yeah, go for broke. Do what you want." So they let me run around, and I did a traditional, I call it an old-fashioned Star Trek tale, but with Burnham and her crew.
You know, along those lines, Dayton, I'm always curious about this. That was your only Discovery novel so far, is that correct?
Actually, I did one a few years back. I wrote one that was it was a prequel that had Lorca and Georgiou. It was set 10 years before the first year of the show, and they tied into the original series episode with Kodos, the Executioner.
Okay.
They're on the planet when that massacre happens, where he murders 4,000 colonists because he thinks he needs to preserve the food supply, and then he becomes wanted for those murders, or believed dead. But so Lorca's on the planet when it happens, and Georgiou is part of the first response team that arrives.
That's very interesting. So when you wrote the second Discovery novel, you already had a pretty good idea about all the characters. We've had Discovery on air for a few years. Was there a particular character or two that you really wanted to sink your teeth in? Like, was there maybe like Detmer, who had like 5 lines in the first 3 seasons, where you're like, I just really want to explore that character more and give her some kind of full backstory, because it's like a clean slate practically? Or did you want to write for Michael Burnham specifically? Did you have something like that?
I had to write. I wanted to write for Burnham because she's the leader, so there's going to be an emphasis on her, at least for the A plot. And then as far as the other character arcs, I really like Stamets and Culber. I've always been fans of both those actors, and I love the characters. I am a huge Tig Notaro fan, so Jet Reno is just everything. She cracks me up every line. I had so much fun writing that character because I'd roll back through scenes on the show and I'd check it to make sure I was getting the right sarcasm or the right whatever. I just wanted one of the biggest compliments you can pay a tie-in writer is when they tell you they can hear the actor speaking your dialogue. It sounds like it's on point for that character. So to me, when I hear that means I did my job, basically. And I got a lot of that from people who loved the Tig scenes and Burnham, and even even all the other characters. And then I had to introduce a couple of new characters to kind of move things around and approach the topic from different points of view. But no, Tig Notaro is life, so I had a lot of fun writing for her.
She's
a great one.
You read pitches for Star Trek Explorer magazine, right?
I do.
And how do you go about, deciding whether a pitch is good enough for the magazine or that you're not going to go with it, the story?
Well, so to be fair, I'm not the final arbiter of those decisions.
Oh, okay.
There is someone who's an actual CBS employee who makes those decisions on behalf of licensing. I'm just the person they pull in for the deep dive on things, and I offer my thoughts and suggestions. And I've said, this is a good story, this is not such a great story, or that one needs a little rework, that kind of thing. But do they go with my recommendations? I think they go with them, most of the time. But usually there's a conversation. Especially if I say something is not right or not quite up to par, then we have a conversation. But so yeah, I read everything and I mark it up and also try to mark out, they need to be aware of certain things that are happening on the show if it's for one of the newer shows, because we're doing fiction based on Legacy Trek and the current crop of shows. So, they have to be aware of things that happen between seasons, or how it might bump up against something that we can't tell them about because it's in a forthcoming season.
Yeah.
I'm the continuity cop in that regard. So
that's awesome.
Continuity cop.
But so I have to ask you, so this means that you read the Nog story at Starfleet Academy in the latest edition?
Probably, but if I did, I read it like months ago or even
longer.
Okay. So, are you the one who wrote that? Is that why we're
No, I didn't. I recently read it, and you mentioned hearing the character's voice in your head while you're reading it, and I really did in that story. So and Boothby, I heard Boothby's voice in that story too. So it was well done.
I can't take credit for any of that. That's all on the writer. I might offer a few nudges in one direction or another to help it sink in better that it's, that character or whatever. But full credit to the writer for bringing a great idea. It's hard to write a story in that space that they're asking for. They're asking for 2,000 to 2,500 words max, which is not a lot of space. I mean, I've written chapters that are longer than that for a novel. So, I mean, you've really got to get in there and get on with it really fast. There's not a lot of fat there, and not everybody can embrace that format as well as the people we've seen doing it for the magazine. So it's a lot of fun.
Dayton, I have difficulty remembering like what I watched 2 episodes ago. So
Totally.
I don't know how you're able to keep all of these different storylines and all of this continuity all in your head at the same time, not violating certain principles and not giving away certain things on one end here. And I mean, how do you remember all this stuff?
Well, I drink a lot. No. No. Part of it is being a fan. I mean, I'm honestly a fan, lifelong fan. So I just happen to parlay that into something that earns money. My knowledge of the shows, I go on a sliding scale. So it's like I'm really strong on original series and next gen and DS9. But after that, it starts to, I'm not as familiar with it because I haven't exposed myself as much, right? I mean, I grew up watching original series reruns. I know that stuff like the back of my hand. And even then, I still forget something once in a while. So, I'm constantly immersed in it. As I tell my wife, I'm like, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not looking at something Star Trek related. And it just so happens, like I'll get an outline and I'll have just read something relating to that topic. So it's fresh, and if I'm not too fresh, then I got to go look. I mean, I don't have it. I don't claim to have it all at instant recall. I do a lot of digging. I either go through a book or I go through some website or I go through a script or, to look for whatever it is that's bugging me, because I'll catch something in a comic script or an outline and I'll be like, there's something off about that and I can't put my finger on it. So I got to go dig. It might take me an hour. It might take me a day. It just depends. But that's part of the job. It's like any other research job, I guess.
Dayton. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Srock.
I had a question about how you found your partner, Kevin Dillmore. I wondered, how do people match up together and realize that they make good writing partners?
Well, like everything else, it's a weird story with us, the two of us. So way back when, now we got to set the clock back. So back in early 1998, when I had found out I would sold that first Star Trek short story, I got an email from this guy, Kevin Dillmore. He was writing for a Star Trek magazine, the Star Trek Communicator, which was the magazine for the fan club back in the 90s. And he had been tasked with interviewing all of the Strange New Worlds winners, that first crop, and kind of getting little bits about each one of them. And so he sent emails to all the 18 winners. And I guess his normal MO was he would send a list of questions, and then they would respond and send it back. But we found out that we lived about 45 minutes apart from each other. So he invited me to meet him after work, and we had a beer, and he would conduct his interview. So I happened to work much closer to where he lives than I lived. So we met at a place near my office and struck up a conversation. I think the interview lasted about 20 minutes, but we ended up chatting for a couple hours and then decided we were going to hang out. We started hanging out. Our wives were very happy because we had a playmate that we could go take each other to these conventions and movies and all the other nerdy stuff. And
go with Kevin.
So his background, he was a journalist. He used to work for a small town paper, and he also worked for the magazine. But he never done any fiction. But he'd studied science fiction writing at college, so he had aspirations of writing. So the way we got partnered as far as writing is we initially wrote a couple of magazine articles together for that communicator, and he wrote a novella for Star Trek based on him interviewing the editor because it was something that was being wound up. They were going to launch this series of ebook novellas to help Microsoft launch their new gadget, their ebook reader, which we're talking the year 2000. So way before the ebook boom that we have now. And he said he was trying to fish for ideas on what would make good stories for this series. And he said, what about blah, blah, blah? And the editor said, that's exactly the kind of story these guys would do. And so I don't know what possessed him to ask the next question, but he said, well, do you mind if I write that up as a pitch and submit it? And the editor said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So he hangs up with the editor and he calls me and he says, I'm in trouble. I just got myself in trouble. I offered to pitch a story, but I don't know how to pitch a story. You know how to pitch a story. You want to do this together? So, and this is a recurring theme with us. We hold up at a place where there were beer and chicken wings, and we broke an outline down for a story and sent it in. And that was our first collaboration for fiction. So we ended up doing, I don't know, a dozen or more of those novellas over the years and several novels. And we did some stuff that's outside Star Trek. So it helps that we're good friends. We are literally best friends. And
that's awesome.
We have similar storytelling ideas, but different strengths. And so it works together. We complement each other, I think, very well. We've never had an argument. We've never fought but we do call ourselves, hetero life mates. We are definitely.
And then I love that. So your pitches are on cocktail napkins with chicken wing sauce on them,
or the bar's logo or whatever it is.
Yeah, but Dayton, when you were talking about your knowledge of legacy Trek, it got my little nerd heart going crazy because and feel free to pass on this question, but I'm very curious. Can you give us your favorite character from each of the 5 legacy Star Trek series? Original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. I'd be very curious to know.
For the original show, I'm a tie between Kirk and Spock. Kirk is kind of like that childhood hero for a kid who never really grew up, that kind of thing. But I get Spock's the brain there. For the Next Gen, Picard as the authority figure, I've always resonated with him. I've always thought of him as perhaps even a more effective leader than Kirk in some respects. DS9 has such a rich character. I swear, as pound for pound, I think I could be the best cast. I know he's here, so I'm not trying to suck up or anything, but I think pound for pound, DS9 might have the strongest cast of all of them. I love Garrick. I love the mystery of Garrick, and I love I love Quark because he's so nuanced. I mean, you think he's one thing, but he's really this. It's the same thing with Garrick. Voyager, the Doctor. The EMH. He's one of my favorites. I just love Robert Picardo in general. Anything he's in is elevated by his presence. Enterprise is a tougher sell because I don't really know that show that well as far as being a fan. So I'll probably default to Archer. But Phlox is fun for comic relief. It's hard though because especially the newer shows, you could catch me tomorrow and I might have different answers.
Okay,
totally.
Particularly with DS9.
I was going to ask that next. What about the new shows? What are your favorite characters in the new shows?
Oh man, the newer shows. I'm a huge fan of Michelle Hurd, and I love Rafi Mussaker.
Yes.
I've seen her in other things, and I knew she was a strong actor, and she's perfect for that role. See Discovery. Like I said, I've already, I said, Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz are great. So I love Stamets and Culber. But I'm also a fan of Jet Reno.
Yes.
So let's see who else left. Lower Decks. I swear, I think my favorite character on Lower Decks might be Mariner. Just because she gets all the great lines, she gets all the sarcastic crap. She's the person in the office conference room that says all the stuff everybody else wants to say. I so identify with that, probably to a degree that's unhealthy because in my corporate life, I used to be the guy that would say the stuff people didn't want to say. Prodigy is kind of still new enough for me that I don't really have a favorite there. I mean, unless you want to count Murph. Just what's left? Strange New Worlds. Man, Strange New Worlds is a tough sell. I'm really digging everything they're doing with that show. But to be honest, M'Benga and Chapel have been the surprise breakout characters for me.
Yep. Me too.
Just because I love how they baked in that backstory for them with the war and the fact that they suffered from PTSD and they do all these, they have a life or a backstory that just never was hinted at on the original show. I think that's one of the great things they've done is they've added a dimension to characters that were kind of one-off or one-dimensional. I mean, I think we can agree that Chapel's character originally was pretty underserved in the original show.
And that brings me to a question, actually, Dayton. When you're creating backstory for these characters and you're making up new adventures for them or filling in gaps that we don't know about, what do you draw on for those stories? Is it something in your own life experience, or is it something that you just can just pull out of what you believe would be their life experience?
I think it depends on the character. So if it's someone that we don't really know much about, I've got more freedom, with the assumption that they're not going to do anything with them on screen, or it's a show that's gone off the air. So I have more room to kind of innovate. But if it's a character like Picard or Kirk or somebody who's, we know very well, their backstory has been mined or, filled in to a staggering degree, it becomes a little more challenging to introduce something new that you previously didn't know about them. And to be fair, when you're writing a tie-in book like a Star Trek novel or a Star Wars novel or anything like that, there are certain guideposts that you can't go beyond. When you're writing these things, you're not really allowed to upset the apple cart or change the table on, to change the game pieces too much. You got to kind of leave the toys where you found them for the most part. That was one of the things we really loved about doing the books in the 2000s and the 2010s was with all the other shows off the air and all the movies done, we had a tremendous freedom to play with the characters that you saw on TV because we didn't expect we'd ever see them again. Of course, all that went off the table when Picard came. But now everything's on. Now everything's up for grabs. So we were doing.
Well, that's why they need a continuity cop now.
Yeah.
I mean, you barely scratched the surface of just how much crazy continuity went on with those books, and we're talking all of them, all the 21st century series. So Voyager, DS9, Next Gen, the books we created with all new characters and ships and stuff. We just got to do all kinds of things that we would never have been able to do while the shows were active. So we promoted people. We moved them to different ships. Some of them got killed off. Some of them got killed off and got better and came back or whatever. They just gave us a lot of latitude. They let us off the leash a little bit. And then when the show started up again, we got a little hesitant because it's like, now we're going to go back to the way it was in the 90s, where we can't really do that. And
Checks
then
and
Picard
balances.
just started drinking because we knew that we were done. Like, oh my God. But again, that's the life of a tie-in writer. And you know what you're doing when you've signed the contract. So no harm, no foul.
I read that you have a new novel that's scheduled for publication in May. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's called Pliable Truths, and it is primarily a next generation novel, but it is set just before the events of the DS9 premiere. So right as the Bajoran occupation is coming to an end, but right before the Starfleet crew, the permanent Starfleet crew gets there. So before Cisco shows up and the other characters that from DS9, the other Federation characters. So right in that little window, I was able to tell a story about how Picard oversees basically peace talks between the Bajorans and the Cardassians as far as restitution, compensation for the occupation. And of course, there's a little mystery going on the other beyond the station. So it's literally in that gap between the episodes with Picard called Chain of Command, where he's tortured by the Cardassians.
Oh yeah.
Madrid, and before Emissary. There's a gap there of a couple of weeks time wise that I got to play in. So you don't get to see Cisco, you don't get to see Dax or Bashir, but you do get to see Kira and Garrick and Nog, and Quark in their pre-DS9 persona, right before the show starts.
Wow. So it's on Terok Nord.
It's on Terok Nord, right as the Bajorans have taken control of the station, right before the Cardassians finally finalize their pullout. There's still some craziness going on the station and the planet.
That is so interesting.
Yes.
That's so fun.
I was asked to do a DS9 Next Gen crossover novel. I said, well, now wait a minute. There's only so much window to do that. And they wanted it set. They wanted a Next Gen set during the series, but DS9. And I was like, well, okay, but there's only such a window before, you only got so much window to do this, because they wanted it to be the Enterprise D and they wanted it to be, and I was like, all right, so looking back at it, I said, if I do it this way, I can't have Worf interact with anybody on the station because he hasn't met any of these people yet. They
Right.
really literally call that out in the first episode he's in.
Mhm.
You know, he's meeting all these people for the first time. I'm like, well, that means he's got to stay out of the action. I got to find something for him to do that's off away from this main action. So
Mhm.
once I finally narrowed in on what I wanted to do, and I realized, you know, I've got a chance to play with Picard and the post-traumatic stress he's enduring from his experience with Madred, the Cardassian. So he's still dealing with that when they order him to deal with this peace conference. You know, he's heading this up on behalf of Starfleet and the Federation, and the Cardassians are there. So everything is still raw. That wound is still open, and he's having to deal with that right then. So that was the space I got to play in for that book.
That's
All right.
amazing.
Is Ducat in that? Do you have
Yes, he
old Ducat?
is.
Oh boy.
Ooh.
Hell yeah! Hell yeah!
We do got to see him. So
Yeah.
we only have you for a couple more minutes here, Dayton, and we really appreciate you taking the time for us. If I could just change the channel for just a second, since we're talking about upcoming things, you dip your toes in Marvel as well?
It's a relatively recent thing, but yes, Kevin and I have been doing some stuff on behalf of Marvel through another publisher. Our book, we had a book come out in November called Iron Man, Tony Stark Declassified, which is essentially a collection of mission reports, newspaper articles, official documents, letters and notes, and it's all anchored by a series of interviews with Tony, with an unnamed narrator, unnamed interviewer. And we basically took our lead from a series of books called The Last Interview, which is a series of books that interviews prominent people in politics or entertainment, kind of in the twilight of their career, so they get to look back on their entire career. That was our point of departure. So we did that, and then that came out in November. We are doing another one for Steve Rogers, Captain America, that'll be out in June, right before 4th of July.
Wow, amazing.
Yep. And there's another book, another writer's doing one for Black Panther, and another writer is doing one for Captain Marvel, the Carol Danvers report. So that'll be coming out.
These are interviews. These are like classified type interviews with the characters.
It's an interview with the characters discussing, you know, their history as that character. So either their origin or the different adventures that they participated in, but it's also anchored by, quote, declassified documents that SHIELD has provided or another government entity has provided. So we use those as kind of like sidebars all through the book that we had to write ourselves, and we had to make it all up. So we vary the format instead of just having it be one long interview, because what they did not want was a novel. They did not want us to do a novel, and they did not want us to do an adaptation of like a comic storyline. They did not want a timeline or a chronology of events. They wanted a different approach to revisiting these prominent events in this particular character's history. So we came up with the interview mechanism.
Is it prior to the stuff that we've seen on screen, or is it after the stuff we've seen on screen?
This is all comics continuity. It has nothing to do with the movies. So it's
okay.
It takes into account the fact that Marvel kind of resets their continuity every so often. You know, everything takes place in a bubble of about 13 to 15 years. So we have to account for the different versions of an origin story, and you know, especially like somebody like Iron Man or Cap, who've been around for 70, 80 years. We have to take into account all that, but make it feel like it only happened 15 years ago, or at the most. So it was the first couple of books we did with those. It was our first time working with Marvel. They've really enjoyed working with us, and they want us back for more. So we'll find out what we're doing.
All right, Dayton.
So
before you go,
wow,
Star Trek, Marvel, do you have another favorite franchise that's on your wish list that you're like, man, it would be like Christmas morning. It would be like springtime in Iceland.
Well, he already did Planet of the Apes too. So
yeah.
That's also on his resume.
Is there
a
franchise?
Predator. I'd love to do Alien. The Alien franchise. If they wanted to do something for nostalgia, I'd do more Planet of the Apes if they asked. And as a real nostalgia kickback, I would love to do something based on the old $6 Million Man show from the 70s.
Yes,
Lee Majors, classic one or updated. I don't care. I don't preference.
Amazing. Well, Dayton, thank you so much for this. This has been so cool. We've got so many more questions for you. I'm sure you've got the craziest list of books and novels and things that you've written. You've worked with IDW, which people love. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
That's been fun. I'd do it again. If we'll do it again sometime. We'll figure out a way to do it again.
I was trying to figure out, Sirach, I was trying to figure out how, if his book that predates the first episode of Deep Space Nine and leads right up into the first episode, Emissary, in May, how can we tie that into Emissary Day, the Cisco Day on May 22nd? I'm like, there's some kind of connection in there.
Very good. That's very good.
I think the book comes out the last Tuesday in May. I got to double check it, but I think it's whatever that last Tuesday is in May. I think that's when it comes out.
I think that might be like the 20.
Well, I've got a ton more questions for you because you know so much about all of this stuff. It's like get to dig in and think about stuff. I wish you had you as a lifeline to call. And have a question.
A lifeline.
Do that too.
Phone a friend.
Just have to make arrangements to do it again sometime.
Well, thanks very much,
so much.
Dayton Ward. Everybody, stick around. We have so much more to talk about and so many more panels on virtual TrekCon 5.
Okay.
Coming.